Right, so without further ado, Duncan.
Okay, my name is Duncan Osborne. I've been teaching writing in this course since 2004, so I think I can say I have, oh, this is not on. Pardon me. How's that? So I've been teaching writing in this course since 2004, so I believe I've got at least some knowledge about how to write a good lab report in EG. So the intent here is to give you information that will assist you not only in your rewrite of Lab 1, should you choose to do that, but also in the lab reports that you'll be writing over the course of the semester through the beginning of December, pardon me. This rewrite of the lab report, if you choose to do that, is due the night before you will do what would be Lab 6, which is your first model shop session. Is that correct? Right.
It's due the night before class 7.
It's due the night before Lab 7. Check the syllabus for your section for that specific date. But what that does mean is that you've got some time to write this lab report so you can do a really bang-up job on it, right? Okay. Let's talk about writing lab reports. First of all, the writing that you're doing in this class is probably different than what you've been used to doing when you were in high school. And so this is really about transitioning to a different kind of writing, specifically as this author, Keith Borchoy, refers to it as college writing. Essentially what he's doing with these 3 questions that he's asking is essentially what you're doing in the lab report for the major sections that you're writing in this class. These are the general questions that you're asking and answering in the lab reports. So your technical writing in this class, the reports, is a form of storytelling, or at least you should think of it as a form of storytelling. The data that you produce in the lab exercise tells the story. The data is the central element of the report. Portions of your data should be in your abstract. All of your data should be in your data and observation section. And a fair amount of data, perhaps even all of your data, should be in your conclusion, your report's an argument. Your data supports one conclusion, and you should be arguing for that conclusion from the start of your lab report until at the end of your lab report. It's not on the one hand and on the other hand. I tell my students in my sections that their report should be about 1,200 to 1,500 words long. Some reports will be longer. For example, you're about to do Lab 3 this week. Some of you may have already turned in Lab 3. Your report should probably be longer than 1,500 words in Lab 3. I strongly recommend that for every lab report, you make an outline for that lab report. You go to the assignment section in the manual, copy and paste the questions and the things that we ask you to respond to in the assignment section into your outline, into the section of the report where you propose to answer that question or respond to that comment. So that'll help you write a more complete, a more thorough lab report. These are the major sections. At this point, I assume you're all familiar with them. So the abstract is a summary of a report. You're going to write it last. It's written in the past tense. This would be an example of an abstract for Lab 1B, the virtual product dissection. Right. So it talks about you had a goal. Your objective was to create a water toy for children aged 4 to 6. Then you did product dissection. You incorporated some components of what you learned in product dissection in the water toy, so you changed the design of the water toy from when you first conceived of it to when you had the final design. So the introduction should be at least 3 paragraphs long. It's the concepts, the formulas, the laws, the principles, everything the reader needs to know to understand your data. So for Lab 1B, you had to talk about the engineering design process, you had to talk about product dissection, and you had to talk about design fixation. For your other labs in this section, it's the background material, formulas, laws, principles. For competition labs, you must include at the end of this section a discussion of the rules. You've got to have the ratios that judge the competition there. And then the final paragraph is a discussion of your design strategy. How did you take all of this information that you presented in the introduction and synthesize it, implement it in your design with an eye toward winning the competition? That's your design strategy. I see some of you taking pictures and writing this down. This PowerPoint is going to be posted on eg.poly.edu today. This week. Also, if you send me an email at dto223@nyu.edu, I will be happy to send a copy of this PowerPoint to you. That's dto223@nyu.edu. You can also find my email address on eg.poly.edu under the Writing Consultants link. That is my NYU address, correct? So you can find it there as well. So you can continue taking notes if you want to, but I'm also happy to send this to you. Just drop me an email. So the introduction, general to specific, right? So for example, on the boom competition lab, you want to start by talking about booms, the types of stresses that impact booms, the definitions of stress and strain, aging factors. Then you want to turn your attention to the rules, the ratios, and a discussion of your design strategy. But this would be an example right here of the start of an introduction section for Lab 1B, where it's talking about the engineering design process. This might be the first paragraph for Lab 1B that you would use in a lab report. And you'll notice here, NYU, 2019, this is how we ask you to make reference to the manual, which should be listed in your works cited section at the end of the report, right? And this is how you do a citation. So everywhere that you're relying on the manual, you have this citation at the end of the paragraph where you're relying on the manual. Right? So that's what we expect you to do. Your procedure section, the essence of the section is repeatability. I should be able to follow your description and replicate your results. It's got to be that complete. You can save yourself some time writing by including pictures in this section. So let's say for the boom competition lab, if one member of your team was tasked with taking pictures of the boom as you were building it, you share those pictures with the members of the team, and those pictures of the boom being built can go into the procedure section. You make reference to them in your text. So you can write a little bit less. And I got to tell you, it's just much easier to understand a procedure section if there are pictures in it. Right? If all you have is text in there, I'm left sort of thinking, I think I know what this looks like. I'm kind of imagining what this is, but I'm not really getting it. So pictures are a tremendous help in this section. It's assumed to be written in chronological order, so there should be no first, second, third, next, then. You list the materials that you use in the first sentence of this section. The materials used were, then list them. And again, use pictures. Pictures in this section. This would be an example of the start of a procedure section for Lab 1B, right? Materials listed first, and a discussion of the two brainstorming sessions that you had for paper clips and for your water toy design. Data and observations, this is where you present your data. You do not analyze your data here, you simply present your data. So, for Lab 1B, it would be pictures of the dissected products that you did. So, let's say you had a picture and you did the Nerf gun, you dissected that, it would be labeled like so, figure 1, Nerf gun with a period at the end. You have to discuss the power supply, energy source, and these other 3 items in this section. That's description of the thing, what these various elements were in the thing where they were present. For other labs, you're doing the same thing. You're simply presenting your data. So for competition labs, you'll have that Excel spreadsheet that the TAs create for you that you download from lab documents on eg.poly.edu. Something to bear in mind about those documents, the TAs commonly put multiple pages at different tabs on that document. So when you download it, you got to check the tabs because the data you want is in one of the tabs. It's not on the first page, it's in one of the other tabs. So always check the tabs. So you present your data for a competition results. You would have a table, that table that I just talked about, labeled like so, table 1, competition results. You would discuss the trial results and the competition results. If you have pictures of the other competitors, generally students don't have that, but if you do, they would be here, they would be labeled, and you discuss them. But when I say you're presenting your data, what I mean is the following. If this was, say, the boom competition lab, your first paragraph would be a relatively short discussion of what your boom looked like assembled on the anchorage. The next paragraph would be a presentation of your boom's weight, its length, its anchor time, and the weight held. its unweighted ratio, and its weighted ratio. Then you would do the exact same data for the other competitors in the competition. You're just presenting the data in a series of paragraphs here. That's all you're doing in this section. So this would be an example of a Nerf gun for Lab 1B. Again, labeled at the bottom like so, exploded view, a picture of the thing right there. So then for tables, the label and the caption go above the table. This is a rule that we use consistently in this course. So figures, it's below. Tables, it's above. Right? Everything that is not a table is a figure. Right? But that's the general rule that we have in this class. So this would be an example of the first couple of paragraphs for a data and observation section for the boom competition lab, right? So the boom, figure 1, referring to this. No, I'm sorry, that's not the boom, pardon me. That's the Nerf gun. The boom, figure 1, that would be a picture of the boom. You can see here this relatively short description of how the boom was built. There should be some additional information here of what it looked like set up on the anchorage. Then the next paragraph is a discussion of the presentation of the boom weight, boom length, anchor time, and unweighted and weighted ratios. And then it's standing in the competition and a reference to the table. As you can see right there, table 1. And that's how you refer to table 1 in the text, like so. Right? Everyone got it? So then finally, in your conclusion section, this is where you analyze the data. For Lab 1B, you wanted to discuss your water toy design before what it looked like before you did the product dissection, and what you would do to it after you did the product dissection, and how the design was further informed by what you learned in the product dissection. You have to discuss whether or not design fixation played a role in this exercise, and then you have to talk about the benefits of dissecting multiple products. For other labs, you've got to analyze the data specifically. For a competition lab, and let's talk about the boom competition lab, you would go back to this data that you presented. So here your analysis has to be, you look at 1 and 2, right? 1.49 and 1.21 were the weighted ratios. Then third and fourth had ratios that weren't very good compared to 1 and 2. So it might be possible in that case to say that those two things need to be, well, actually, let me amend that. You might be tempted in this case to say that those two booms need to be redesigned because their ratios were significantly below the ratios achieved by 1 and 2. But then you've got to do this kind of interesting thing, is you've got to look at the weight held by 3 and 4. Those were the first and second highest weights held in this lab exercise. So they did something right. Right? So you've got to pay attention to all of that data there. So then your analysis has got to look at the anchor time, and that would appear to have controlled the result of this exercise. Right? Because 1 and 2 were both below 30 seconds at 29 and 25 seconds. 3 and 4 were at 70 seconds and 101 seconds. And then you might consider looking at boom weight. That might have had some impact. I think boom length you don't have to pay any attention to. I seriously doubt that amounts of 0.01, 0.03 had any impact on these ratios over here, so I don't think you have to be concerned with boom length. But you've got to look at all of this data to make your analysis in your conclusion section. So the numbers are in your text. You discuss them in data and observations. You presented the weighted ratios in your abstract. Then you've got to make your analysis using those numbers in your discussion and your conclusion section. This is what your works cited section should look like. You have to have the manual in here, and this is what the citation should look like. This is for Lab 1B. More than one citation in this section is very good if you want to go to other sources to gather other information. You should certainly do that. Put them in the section, have in-text citations to them. And again, you're using the format that I showed you before called author date. And when I use the author, comma, the year is 2019. You would use the same thing for the other sources here. Your original data is where you put your lab notes. Your lab notes belong in original data and only there. You should not have your lab notes in any other section of the report. Now, the examples that I showed you of illustrations use what is called sentence case. This is another example of sentence case up here, right? So the first letter of the first word in the caption is capitalized. The other words that are not proper nouns are not capitalized. There's a period at the end. The second way you can do this is called title case. What title case says is that you have to capitalize all of the important words. So these would be important words. Words like and, of, the would not be capitalized. And you can see with title case, there's no period at the end. So you really have a choice to make here. You can use sentence case with no period at the end. You can use title case with a period at the end or not. Whichever choice you make, you've got to use it consistently from start to finish in your lab report. So the choice is up to you. If you know one of these styles and you've been using one of these styles previously, continue to use that style and use it consistently. But these are really the two choices available to you. So the in-text references are the same for both styles. So for figure 1, it's figure 1 in parentheses, or you can do as shown in figure 1, and then you go on to talk about what's in figure 1. So those are the choices that are available to you, and you have to make a choice again. Be consistent, whichever choice you make. Let's talk about equations. This becomes a bit more complex here. So without text here, this is what an equation should look like on your page. Here's the equation centered in the middle of the page. I ask my students to use equation editor. Don't cut and paste a screenshot from a manual. Use equation editor. And then it's identified by this number in parentheses that's placed flush right on the page. Right? So that's for equations. So the equation should be on a separate line. It's not in the text. It's on a separate line. It's centered. There's no colon or period in the sentence that is sort of introducing that equation. And the number, usually on the right for this class, it should be on the right. And so this is what it should look like. This would be an example of the ideal gas law. As you can see, the equation PV equals nRT is centered. It's identified by the number, which is flush right on the page. Then the number follows the ideal gas law there in the text, and the text wraps around the equation. Everyone got it? That's what I look for in my labs. I don't know what your writing consultants have told you in other classes. We don't have a formal standard, but that's what I would ask you to do if you were in one of my sections. And I should tell you, this is what you're going to be required to do in other classes as you continue your career here in Tandon, and it certainly will be what you're required to do in your professional career after you graduate. So I would strongly suggest you get in the habit of doing this now. Some classes, one of the TAs in one of my sections tells me that in your physics class, is everyone taking physics? No. Okay, so when you get into physics, they're going to make you do this. If you don't do it, they're going to penalize you, and apparently quite seriously, or so I'm told. What I'm told, they're mean in physics. What can I tell you? So, but you should start doing it now. Get into the habit of doing it, so it's second nature when you start taking physics. So to make that number, on the flush right side of the page, go to your Insert tab, and I'm talking about Word here, right? Not Google Docs or Pages or some other application that you shouldn't be using to write your lab report. Go to the Insert tab, click on Text Box, scroll down to Draw Text Box, create the text box, make it flush right, enter the parentheses and the number, correct the font and the type by going to your Home tab and making certain the font in the box is the same as the font that you're using to write the rest of the report. Then you want to click on the text box again. You should get a link at the top of your toolbar that says Shape Outline. Go to Shape Outline and select No Outline. Right? So that's how you should do that. So these are some general notes on your lab reports. So all of your illustrations have to be labeled and you have to have in-text references to them. There is no reason to have an illustration in your report if you do not have an in-text reference to it. There must be in-text references to all of the sources in your works cited section. So again, you use the author date format that I showed you before. Your report must use the passive voice. Anyone having trouble with a passive voice? One person? Well, that's good. Two. All right. So look, if you go to et.poly.edu and under technical writing, there's a PowerPoint you can download there that will assist you with a passive voice. You can also go to the tutoring center, and if you spend an hour with a tutor there, I promise you after the hour you'll get it right. They know how to drill you on this, and they're very good about it. They're practiced at doing it, so you can spend an hour there to get some assistance. And I strongly suggest that you complete a draft of your lab report 48 to 72 hours before it's due. Set it aside for a while. Go back to it, check it, make corrections to it if need be, and then that's the version that you're going to submit. And as always, read the assignment section for every lab report. You've got to respond to the questions and the things that we ask you to talk about in the assignment section, in the appropriate section in your lab report. So always read that section. And again, I would highlight it, copy it, and paste it into your report. So you've got it sitting in the report in your outline, and you're responding to it in the appropriate section. Questions about lab reports? Yes, sir. Al, let me get your microphone. Hang on a second.
So my question is about how passive voice is used. Passive voice in lab reports just used to eliminate pronouns that show that you're doing the lab, or do you also have to use passive voice to, let's say, I was describing how the code instructs the robot to go somewhere. So am I allowed to say actively, the code instructed the robot to drive by these tiles that follow the line? Like, am I allowed to say that, or do
That
I
is the passive voice. What you just used is the passive voice.
instructed the robot?
Yes.
That's passive voice?
Yes. As opposed to writing, I wrote the code that instructed the robot to go to such and such a place. The purpose, first of all, the passive voice is standard in technical communication.
So I don't just have to say, like, the robot was instructed to go to tile 5. I can actually say the code instructed the robot.
Yes, both of those are correct. I would accept both of them. You see, you do know how to use the passive. No? But here's the basic rule. If you're using I, we, me, the team, the students, the engineers, you're not using the passive voice. So banish those words from your vocabulary when you're writing your lab report. One thing you can do, I think that grammar check applications stink. I think they're useless. The one thing they're good for is checking to see if you're using the passive voice. Grammar check applications typically don't like the passive voice, so you'll get that line underneath it, and you'll get the note that says, this is the passive voice, wouldn't you like to change it? And of course you don't change it, because what you're doing is correct. Any other questions? No questions?
Alright, so I technically have like 2 questions. The first one is for labeling your pictures, the captions. Do they have to be in italics or no?
No, does not have to be in italics.
And also going back to the passive voice question, wouldn't it be the robot was instructed by the code? Or
That's fine too.
oh, okay. Because it sounded really active to me, the other one.
Yeah, that's not the measure of whether or not it's the passive voice.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Or from a passive
So,
voice.
here's the thing about special characters, about italicizing.
Okay.
If you use special characters, that places a responsibility on you to go back through the entire report and make certain that you're doing it consistently. Now, your time is your time, and you can spend your time doing that, or you can just skip italicizing, figure the labels and captions, and not spend time checking for that in every lab report that you get. Now, some classes here at Camden, professors may require that sort of thing from you. That's the kind of question you want to ask at the start of the class, right? What style guide do you use? What are your requirements in the reports? But for this class, italicizing special characters in general, bolding, italicizing, underlining, as far as I'm concerned, it adds no value to the report. So I think it's a waste of your time.